This is the story of something that happened in a school not far from where I used to live. I'm going to tell you everything as I heard it, because once I did, I couldn't sleep properly for days. If you're easily scared, maybe you shouldn't listen. But if you're curious like I was, then listen closely. There was this small town school, quiet, nothing flashy. Everyone said it was a peaceful place, until one strange year changed everything. The school was old, built sometime in the 1950s with long hallways and a basement that nobody liked to talk about. They used to keep broken desks and old boxes down there, but it always felt off, cold, like someone was watching you. It all started with a new girl named Annika. She moved into town with her parents, and on her first day, something weird happened. The teacher gave her a seat near the back of the classroom, right by the window. But the seat next to her? Empty. No one ever sat there, even though it wasn't broken or anything. Annika asked about it, and the teacher just said, "We leave. That seat empty, it's tradition." She thought that was strange, but didn't say much. Later that week, Annika made a mistake. She sat on that seat during lunch, just to be funny. A few students told her not to do that. One boy, Ravi, even pulled her away and whispered, "Don't sit there. That's Roshni's seat." "Who's Roshni?" Annika asked, but Ravi didn't answer. That night, Annika told her parents about it and laughed. Kids at school were just trying to scare her, right? The next day, she came to school looking tired. Her eyes had dark circles. When her friends asked her what was wrong, she said she'd had nightmares. A girl with long black hair had stood outside, her bedroom window staring at her. She didn't say anything, just stared with these empty eyes. She thought it was just a dream, but it happened again and again. The third night, the girl wasn't outside the window. She was inside the room. Annika screamed so loud her parents came running in. But by the time they turned on the lights, nothing was there. Her parents told her it was stress, maybe from the new school. The next day at school, Annika looked pale. Her hands shook, and she didn't speak much. During class, she suddenly stood up, staring at that empty seat next to her. The teacher asked if she was okay, but Annika just pointed and said, "She's sitting there, right now. Can't you see her?" Everyone turned to look, but of course the seat was empty. The school counselor met with her that afternoon. She said Annika was probably going through some emotional adjustment. They told her to rest, maybe take a few days off. But things got worse. 2 days later, her parents called the school. Annika was missing. Her bed was untouched. The window was wide open. No sign of where she went. Just one thing left behind on her desk, a drawing. It was a picture of a girl with no face standing in front of a school desk, and written under it, in shaky handwriting, "She wants her seat back." Police searched everywhere. No clues, no leads. Everyone was shocked, and the school was panicking. For a while, they even shut down the school. That's when the older staff started whispering about something they hadn't told anyone for years. A long time ago, maybe 10 or 15 years back, there was a girl named Roshni in the same school. She was shy, quiet, and always sat in that same seat. She was often bullied. No one liked her much. They said she was strange. She talked to herself, wrote weird poems, and stared at walls. One day, the class played a prank on her. They locked her in the basement after school as a joke. But something went wrong. That night there was a power cut, and when they went to get her the next morning, she was gone. Just Gone. No body. No sign of escape. Just scratch marks on the door from the inside, and a small notebook with a final message. I was always invisible. Now I'll make you see me. The school kept the story quiet. No one wanted trouble. They told everyone she ran away, but ever since then that seat stayed empty. It was like some unspoken rule. Everyone just knew not to sit there. Until Annika. After her disappearance, strange things began happening again. Students started hearing whispers in the hallway. One boy swore he saw someone walking behind him in the mirror, but no one was there when he turned around. Another girl fainted in the restroom after hearing a voice right in her ear say, "You'll be next." CCTV footage from classrooms started showing something else. In the middle of the night, the camera in that room, Annika's class, would turn on by itself. It would record for exactly 3 minutes and then stop. The school IT guy checked the recordings and saw something that made him quit his job immediately. He said every recording showed the same thing. That empty desk. Not empty. A girl sitting there, long hair covering her face, slowly turning her head toward the camera. But her face was always blurred, like the camera couldn't focus on it. The principal finally ordered that the desk be removed and burned. A small ritual was done by a local priest. The school tried to move on. But here's the thing. About a year later, another new student joined. This time, it was a boy named Kunal. He was curious, like Annika had been. He heard the stories and laughed them off. Ghosts? Nah. He was too smart for that. One day he found an old chair in the storage room. You won't believe this, but it was the same desk that had been removed. Somehow it wasn't destroyed. Somehow it came back. He thought it would be funny to sneak it into his classroom and sit in it. He lasted 3 days. Then he started screaming. In the middle of a test, pointing at an empty corner of the room, crying, "She's right there, don't you see her? She's smiling at me." They took him to the hospital. He hasn't spoken since. Some say the spirit of Roshni never left, that she never wanted to hurt anyone. She just wanted someone to notice her. But every time someone does, she gets stronger. Every time someone sits in her place, she finds a way back in. And the worst part? There's no way to tell where she'll appear next. That's the disturbing true school horror story people still whisper about in that town. And you know what? Some say if you ever visit that school even today and stand near the last desk by the window, you'll feel it. Cold heavy, like someone's still sitting there, waiting. Do you still think it's just a story? Because Annika was real. Roshni was real. And that seat still waits. This is the story of something that happened to a friend of mine, and I still can't shake it from my mind. I'm not sure if you'll believe it, but I'm telling you because it's one of those stories that doesn't let go. I just hope you're ready, because this one, it'll send a chill down your spine. This all started with a guy named Mark. Mark was a regular guy, nothing special, just your average college student. He lived in a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone. Mark wasn't super popular, but he had a good group of friends and he was the type to enjoy his peace. He didn't go out much, preferring to stay home and play video games or watch movies. One Friday night, he got a call from his old friend Dave, who had recently moved to a big city for work. Dave invited Mark to come over for a weekend, saying it would be a good chance to catch up. Mark hadn't seen Dave in months, so he agreed. They used to hang out all the time in high school, and Mark missed having someone to talk to about the old days. The plan was simple. Mark would take a bus to the city and Dave would pick him up. Mark packed a small bag, grabbed his jacket and left for the station. The bus ride wasn't long, but it felt like it dragged on. Maybe it was because Mark was looking forward to seeing his friend. He'd forgotten what it was like to leave his quiet life behind and just have fun for a change. By the time he arrived in the city, it was late and the streets were deserted. Dave had told him to meet him outside a building near the center, but there was a problem. The building Dave had mentioned wasn't where it was supposed to be. Mark looked around, trying to get his bearings. The streetlights flickered like they were about to go out, and the only noise was the distant hum of traffic. Confused, Mark checked his phone for any new messages. He found a text from Dave. "Sorry, man. Running a little late. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait inside the building." Mark raised an eyebrow. Wait inside the building? He looked at the building in question. It was an old abandoned warehouse that looked like it had been there for decades. It was covered in graffiti, with cracked windows and rusted metal doors. It seemed out of place in the middle of a busy city, but the message was clear. Dave wanted him to go inside. Mark was hesitant, but he figured his friend must be joking. Maybe it's an inside joke, he thought to himself. He shrugged and pushed open the door to the warehouse. The interior was dark, with only a few lights scattered around the walls. The air was damp, and Mark's footsteps echoed off the walls as he walked in. There was a strange feeling in the air, like the place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The building was huge, with multiple floors, and Mark had no idea what to expect. As he walked further in, he noticed something strange. The place was filled with old furniture, couches, chairs, tables. Some of it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It seemed like someone had used it as a temporary home at some point. But there was something odd about the setup. The furniture was arranged in strange patterns, almost like a maze, and the way it was placed made the space feel even more claustrophobic. Mark called out, "Dave, you here?" His voice echoed in the silence. No answer. He checked his phone again. No new messages. "All right, maybe he's just messing with me," Mark muttered to himself. He walked deeper into the warehouse, trying to make sense of the bizarre scene. That's when he saw it. At the far end of the room, sitting on a chair, in the corner, was a person. The figure was still, and from a distance it looked like they were staring straight ahead. Mark froze. At first he thought it was Dave, but something about the figure felt wrong. The person's posture was too rigid, too unnatural. Mark's heart started to race. He took a step forward, and that's when the person turned their head. Slowly, the face was wrong. It wasn't Dave. It wasn't even human, at least not in the way Mark was used to. The eyes were too wide, too large, and they glowed faintly in the dim light. The skin was pale, almost sickly, and the lips were thin and cracked. There was no emotion on the face, no hint of recognition or understanding. Mark's breath caught in his throat. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet were frozen to the floor. The figure slowly stood up, and Mark felt the temperature in the room drop. It was like the air itself was thickening, pressing in on him. Mark's hands shook as he reached for his phone, but just as he was about to dial 911, the figure spoke. "Why did you come?" Mark's heart nearly stopped. The voice wasn't Dave's. It was low, gravelly, and distorted, like it was coming from a place far beyond this world. Mark couldn't find his voice. He wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. "I told you to stay outside," the figure continued, its voice gaining strength. "Now, you're here." With that, it took a step toward Mark. The room seemed to grow colder still, and Mark could feel an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. He took a step back, then another. But the figure kept moving forward. its eyes locked on him. Mark finally found his voice. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it moved faster now, closing the gap between them. Mark turned and ran. He sprinted through the maze of furniture, his footsteps echoing in the hollow. Silence. He glanced over his shoulder, but the figure was right behind him, moving impossibly fast, its distorted shape getting closer with each passing second. Finally, Mark reached the door he had come in through, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it closed, trapping him inside. His breath came in short gasps, panic rising in his chest. The figure's voice echoed from behind him. "You shouldn't have come here. You're mine now." Mark's hands shook as he struggled with the door, but it refused to open. The figure was almost upon him, and then, just as quickly as it had all started, the door flung open on its own. Mark didn't think twice. He bolted outside, running faster than he ever had before, not daring to look back. When he finally reached the street, he turned to find the warehouse behind him. It was still there, just as it had been, with its dark windows staring back at him. The figure wasn't there anymore. But that night, Mark couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those glowing eyes, that twisted face. He tried calling Dave, but his phone went straight to voicemail. There were no more texts, no more calls. And even now, every time Mark looks out his window, he feels like something is watching him, waiting. He hasn't heard from Dave since that night. And honestly, he doesn't know if he ever will. So next time someone invites you to a strange place or asks you to wait somewhere, maybe think twice. Because there are some places that you should never enter, and some things that you should never disturb. This is the story of a guy named Jason. He was like any other college student, living in a small town and trying to get through his studies without too much drama. Jason wasn't into anything weird or supernatural. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he certainly didn't think much about the old rumors that floated around about the local abandoned mansion. But let me tell you, by the end of this story, Jason would believe in things he never thought possible. It all started one Saturday evening. Jason had finished a long week of classes and was looking forward to a quiet weekend. He was sitting in his apartment, flipping through channels when his phone buzzed. It was a text from his friend Evan. "Hey, you up for something different tonight?" The message read. Jason frowned. Evan wasn't one to send texts like that. Usually it was just about grabbing a drink or hanging out. Jason texted back, "What's going on?" Evan replied quickly, "I know it's been talked about for years, but I think tonight's the night we finally check out the old mansion on Willow Hill." Jason immediately felt a chill run down his spine. The mansion on Willow Hill was the stuff of local legends. Everyone in the town had heard the stories, how it had once belonged to an old reclusive millionaire who disappeared without a trace, leaving the mansion to rot for decades. No one had dared go near it in years. The place was said to be haunted, voices in the windows, strange lights at night, and rumors of a curse. Jason hesitated. He wasn't the type to get caught up in urban legends, but something about the way Evan texted made him curious. "What's the plan?" Jason typed back. Evan's reply came quickly. "We'll meet at the bottom of the hill around midnight. Just bring a flashlight and be ready for anything. It's time to find out what's really inside." Jason had never been one to shy away from a challenge. He told himself he was just going to check it out, get in, and get out. No big deal. But that night, when midnight came around, his stomach was already in knots as he stood at the base of Willow Hill. The mansion loomed at the top a silhouette against the moonlit sky. Even from this distance, Jason could see that it looked even more eerie than he remembered. The windows were dark, and the house seemed to breathe in the night air like it was alive. Evan wasn't there yet, so Jason stood in the shadow of a tree, nervously checking his phone. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Evan approaching. "You ready?" Evan asked, his voice low but with a spark of excitement. "Yeah," Jason said, his voice shaky. "I guess so." They started up the hill, their flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The air was cooler here, and the closer they got to the mansion, the heavier the atmosphere seemed to get. The mansion sat atop the hill like a giant, watching over the town. The path leading to the front door was overgrown, the once manicured garden now wild and untamed. As they reached the front steps, Evan stopped. "I read somewhere that people hear voices inside. Maybe we'll get lucky and catch something on camera." Jason laughed nervously. "Right, voices. This is crazy, man." They stepped onto the porch, the old wood creaking under their weight. The front door was unlocked, a sign that no one had been there in a long time. Evan pushed it open slowly, the hinges squealing loudly in protest. The inside of the mansion was cold and damp. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mildew filled their nostrils. The grand chandelier overhead was covered in cobwebs, and the once beautiful wallpaper was peeling away in strips. It was obvious no one had lived here in decades. "Well, this is lovely," Jason said sarcastically, trying to hide the unease creeping into his chest. "Let's get this over with." Evan was already moving deeper into the house, his flashlight sweeping over the room. "I'll bet there's something here. We just need to look around." The two of them moved through the house room by room, their footsteps echoing off the walls. They found a grand staircase that led to the upper floors, but Jason didn't feel like going up there. Something about the house made him want to leave as quickly as possible, but Evan wasn't listening to him. He was fascinated, poking his head into every room, shining his flashlight into dark corners. When they reached the kitchen, Evan froze. His flashlight illuminated something on the floor, a trail of old dried blood. It led to a doorway, and beyond it was a small, narrow hallway. The air felt colder now, almost like they were being watched. Jason's heart was racing. "Evan, this isn't funny anymore. We should get out of here." Evan didn't listen. He walked toward the hallway, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. "What do you think this is? Some old murder scene? Maybe we're about to uncover a big secret." Before Jason could stop him, Evan disappeared into the dark hallway. Jason stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He was terrified, but he couldn't just leave his friend behind. He took a deep breath and followed Evan. The hallway was dark and narrow. The walls were lined with old pictures, some of them faded, others torn. The floorboards groaned underfoot, but there was no other sound. No voices, no creaking of the house. Then, Jason saw it. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar. It was the only door that wasn't covered in dust. It looked as if someone had been there recently. A strange sense of dread washed over him as they approached. "Evan, wait up," Jason whispered. But Evan was already at the door. He pushed it open, and the flashlight beam illuminated what was inside. It was a small, dusty room, filled with old furniture covered in sheets. But the strangest thing was in the center of the room, a large mirror, its surface cracked and streaked with age. And as they stared at it, the cracks seemed to shift and move, almost like the glass itself was alive. Suddenly, Jason heard a sound, a soft whisper, so quiet he almost didn't catch it. He looked around, but there was no one else in the room, just him, Evan, and the mirror. "Did you hear that?" Jason asked. his voice barely above a whisper. Evan didn't answer. He was staring into the mirror, his face pale. Jason followed his gaze, and that's when he saw it. A figure standing behind them in the reflection. It was a man, his face obscured by shadows, but Jason could feel his eyes boring into them. Evan finally spoke. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The door slammed shut behind them, and the air grew thick with an oppressive pressure. The whispering grew louder, turning into words that Jason could barely understand. The room seemed to twist, the walls warping around them. And then the figure in the mirror moved. Jason turned to run, but before he could make it to the door, the floor beneath him buckled. He screamed as he fell, landing hard on the cold stone floor below. When he opened his eyes, the mansion was gone. The mirror, the hallway, everything was gone. He was lying in an empty field, the moon hanging high above him. Evan was nowhere to be found. To this day, Jason can't explain what happened that night. Some say the mansion is still there, but no one dares to go near it. Others say it's just a place where the past never quite let go. But Jason knows one thing for sure. He'll never forget that figure in the mirror, and he'll never set foot in Willow Hill again. This is the story of a man named Mark Thompson. Now, Mark wasn't someone who believed in things like ghosts or spirits. He was a down-to-earth guy, always grounded in logic and reason. He worked as a software developer, spending most of his days behind a desk, coding away. But one summer night, that all changed. That night, Mark learned there were things in this world that couldn't be explained. It all started on a regular Thursday evening. Mark had just finished his shift and was headed home. He lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a quiet area that was far removed from the bustle of the city center. He liked it that way. Peaceful, away from distractions. Perfect for unwinding after a long day of work. When Mark arrived home that evening, he noticed something strange. The front door of his apartment was slightly ajar. Now Mark was the only one who lived there, so this was odd. He usually made sure to lock everything up tight before he left, but it didn't seem like anyone had forced the door open. It was just a little cracked, like it had been left that way. Frowning, Mark stepped inside, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" His voice echoed through the empty apartment. There was no answer. Everything looked normal, but that feeling, the kind of feeling you get when something isn't quite right, was creeping up on him. He shrugged it off, thinking maybe he'd just forgotten to lock it before he left. He went about his evening, making dinner and relaxing on the couch with a book. But that's when the first odd thing happened. As he was reading, he heard a faint noise. At first, he thought it was just the house settling, the typical creaks and groans of an old building. But then it came again, like footsteps, soft and light, coming from somewhere nearby. Mark's eyes darted to the door, but the apartment was still empty. His heartbeat quickened. He told himself it was just his imagination running wild. After all, he'd been working long hours, and he was probably just exhausted. But the footsteps didn't stop. They continued, growing louder, moving across the room as if someone was walking around him. Mark stood up slowly, his pulse racing. He walked toward the sound, and just as he reached the hallway, it stopped. He turned the corner to check, but the hallway was empty. Confused and a little unsettled, Mark stood still for a moment, wondering if he'd heard things. Maybe it was the wind outside, or maybe he was just stressed. He tried to shake off the feeling that something was off, but he couldn't. That night, he went to bed early, hoping sleep would clear his head. But just as he was about to drift off, he heard it again. The footsteps. This time they were much closer. It sounded like someone was walking right beside his bed. His breath caught in his throat, and he froze, terrified to even move. He lay there for what felt like hours, the footsteps pacing around the room. Then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped. Mark didn't know what to do. He thought about calling the police, but the rational part of him told him there was no evidence of anything suspicious. There was nothing to explain the footsteps, but he didn't have any proof that anything was actually happening. It was just a feeling. The next few days were no better. Mark tried to continue his normal routine, but the strange occurrences kept happening. At work, he couldn't focus, constantly thinking about the footsteps in his apartment. His colleagues noticed his distracted behavior and asked if he was okay. He just shrugged it off and tried to pretend everything was fine. But things only got worse. One evening, Mark came home to find all the lights in his apartment on. He was certain he hadn't left them on. His heart raced as he walked through the rooms, checking each one carefully. Nothing seemed out of place, but the lights were still on, flickering faintly as if someone had just been there. It was then that Mark realized that the odd noises and the strange feelings weren't just coincidences. Someone, or something, was in his apartment with him. Mark tried to talk himself out of it. He told himself it was just the house settling, the plumbing acting up, or maybe the power fluctuating. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. That night, things took a darker turn. Mark was lying in bed trying to sleep when he felt it. A cold breeze brushed across his face, despite the fact that the windows were all closed. He opened his eyes, and for the briefest moment, he saw something. A shadow standing at the foot of his bed. It was tall and thin, its features blurred, like a silhouette without substance. The shadow didn't move, but Mark could feel it watching him. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he was frozen in place, unable to make a sound or move a muscle. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the shadow vanished, and the room returned to normal. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The next day, Mark made a decision. He couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. He called a friend, asking if he could crash at their place for a while. But when he went to gather his things, that's when he found it. The thing that would change everything. On the wall, above his bed, were strange markings, almost like scratches. They looked like they had been made by something sharp, but they weren't random. The markings formed a shape, a pattern. It was almost like a word, but not in any language he recognized. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the marks, feeling an eerie coldness seep into his skin. Mark knew then that whatever was happening in his apartment wasn't just a trick of the mind. Something was there. Something that had been waiting for him. He packed up quickly, not looking back. As he walked out of the apartment, he felt a sense of relief, but also fear. He had no idea what he had just experienced, but he couldn't shake the thought that it wasn't over. Mark never returned to that apartment. He moved into a new place, far away from the old building. But the memory of the footsteps, the shadow, and the strange markings stayed with him. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't explain it. Was it a ghost? A spirit? Or was there something darker at work? To this day, Mark still doesn't have the answers, but he knows one thing. Some things are better left unexplored.